Last few decades, Canada has neither spent enough on our defence nor invested enough in our defence industries. We've relied too heavily on our geography and others to protect us. And this has created vulnerabilities that we can no longer afford and dependencies that we can no longer sustain. This strategic autonomy doesn't mean isolation. It means being strong enough to be a partner of choice rather than a dependent. It means building a domestic defence industrial base so we are never hostage to the decisions of others when it comes to our security.
We should all agree that Canada needs to become militarily independent, and that includes not just having a strong armed forces, but the ability to supply that armed forces with the best technology and equipment that exists in the world. We have too much bureaucracy. Everyone agrees on that. Mr. Carney's solution? Create more bureaucracy. His new proposal adds 6 new bureaucracies, agencies, councils, units, and other bureaucracies that will actually gum up and slow the system down.
Prime Minister Mark Carney there, and then reaction from Pierre Poilievre, the Prime Minister unveiling a long-awaited multi-billion-dollar defence industrial strategy that bets big on building at home. As Canada seeks to reduce its reliance on the United States, the federal government is trying to boost the amount of military equipment it buys domestically. The $6.6 billion strategy promises over the course of a decade to boost the share of defence contracts awarded to Canadian companies to 70% from the current 43%, to double Canada's defence exports and create 125,000 new jobs. Federal Industry Minister Melanie Joly will be in charge of implementing the new policy. Hi, Minister Joly. Pleasure to welcome you back to the show. As always, thanks for making the time.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. Hi, Vashti.
In announcing this plan today, the Prime Minister said that it'll create 125,000 new jobs over the next decade. How do you know that?
Well, because first and foremost, we know that by investing even more in defense and in companies in Canada, we can grow the revenues, and by growing the revenues, they will be able to hire and we will be able to create more jobs. So right now, if you look at first thing first, how many contracts by the Canadian Armed Forces are given to Canadian companies, we're at 42%. That's quite low. Our goal is to nearly double it to get to 70%. And we know that we will be increasing by doing that, not only our capacity to have a defense sector, but also our capacity to even sell it to the Canadian Armed Forces and also to export. So the growth in terms of revenues for the defense industrial sector will be growing by 220%. So that's why, based on all these different calculus, we get to 125,000 jobs.
So I understand in theory, certainly exactly what you just laid out, right? The idea is to boost the share of defense contracts going to Canadian companies, in turn create a bigger export base as well, and then boost the revenues of that industrial base. But my question is, like, how you know for sure that will happen? Because in the briefing, for example, that was provided by officials, there is nothing, no target set in the interim, right? It's just this will happen over a decade or by the end of a decade. There aren't really any specifics by which Canadians can hold your government accountable along the way. So how do you know for sure, and how will we know in turn that this is happening?
So what is clear is how much we will be investing in our Canadian Armed Forces and how much we'll be investing in defense. Of course, we're targeting 2% this year of all of our GDP in defense. So, and over the next 5 years, we know that that's going to be $80 billion at least, and that's $16.5 billion per year. That's pretty much 3 times the national daycare program. It's a lot of investment. And so we think that only in the next year, we will be launching procurements that are really, really important. And this is led by the Secretary of State for Defense Procurement, Stephen Shure. But it is 12 submarines. It is 15 river-class destroyers. This is 6 polar icebreakers. This is 2 major icebreakers. This is a major space communication contract. This is another contract also for ammunitions. And also, of course, we're talking about everything linked to the fighter jets contract and also for the training and simulation. That is only in the next year. So it shows how much these are different opportunities for Canadian companies, and not only that, but for the workers and also for those working in the sectors that are tariffs. Steel, aluminum, even auto sector, all these workers can benefit from not only these investments, but protecting their jobs, and also we think we can create new jobs.
And I wouldn't take away from your government's intent, and I think Canadians understand it very clearly. But intent isn't always the same thing as execution, and I would say particularly in the defense industrial space. And I'll point to a couple of the examples that you just provided. When you talk about submarines, there had been indications from the government that a decision could be taken perhaps even by the end of the year. The F-35 review was supposed to be completed by the end of the summer, and it still hasn't materialized. This industrial policy, your government also indicated would be completed by the end of last year, and here we are, 6 weeks past that deadline. There are many examples throughout this government, the past government, and the one before it where, planned defense spending didn't actually materialize, particularly in the area of procurement. Why should Canadians be convinced that this time is any different?
So I understand the impatience. I really, really do. But I think, meanwhile, when we're talking to people in the industry, they're saying, wow, you were able to come up with a new defense industrial strategy within, a year. And actually, we did it in nearly 7 months. This is an entire culture change, and this is the first time Canada has a defense industrial strategy. So good news. At the same time, we didn't stop. We didn't wait. Meanwhile, we signed a new SAFE agreement, which is basically a partnership with European countries, and we're the only non-European countries to have access to defense procurement in Europe. First. Second, we signed a contract with Bombardier for 6 new aircrafts. Third, we came up with a new partnership with the European Space Agency of $500 million. We just also came up with the BDC having $4 billion in capital to invest across the country in companies that will be in the defense sector. This is a major undertaking. Of course, I understand the impatience. I understand your impatience asking me the questions, and I'm as impatient as you, but I really think that things are moving ahead.
I want to talk about sort of one factor about how they will move ahead, if I may, Minister, and that's around when you talk about boosting the export capacity of the defense industrial base here. And in particular, a question the Prime Minister got today that I listened to with great interest about where those exports may go in order to achieve some of the targets that you've set. The Prime Minister was asked if it meant a different posture than the previous government you were a part of about shipping weapons to countries which are not our allies. He said the short answer is yes, but that there would be guardrails. What are those guardrails?
Well, our human rights policy remains. It's been the guiding principle of many, many governments beforehand, and we will continue to make sure that we have that lens. At the same time, the reality, when you look at the defense industry in Canada, well, for many, many years, a lot of the companies from CAE to Rochelle, etc., have been saying, well, we're able to get and win contracts in more countries, and it's easier for us to actually find contracts in countries than actually get contracts from our government, which doesn't make sense because these are Canadian companies. And so we know that they're already really good at exporting. We've been exporting planes, we've been exporting also a lot of our training and simulation expertise across the world, but we know that we can help also these companies at home. So we will be able to increase the exports through, of course, the European Union. I just talked about the SAFE agreement we signed. There's a lot of interest also from Asian countries as well, Japan, Korea for sure, and that's our mode in which we're operating.
If these companies, though, are telling you, Minister, with respect that it's easier to sell elsewhere than here in Canada, why should they, and again by extension Canadians, trust the Liberals that ran a government for 10 years, that created that situation, to then fix it?
Well, we're in a new world now. We know that there's a new geopolitics that we don't control, but we know also that all NATO countries are now increasing their investments in defense. We would all need to get to 2% by the end of the year. We all need to increase to actually 5% by 2035. So that's the goal. We're doing our part. And while investing $500 billion by 2035, we will also take care of our own. And we will also invest in us. And so that's why we're creating all of these jobs, and at the same time we will equip our Canadian Armed Forces that really need to be well supported.
What happens if the geopolitical imperative changes with the midterms, for example, or with the next election in the United States? Like, how can, again, Canadians be assured that once the sort of de facto situation or the status quo goes back to what it was, that the things that should have been obvious to Liberals back then will remain obvious to Liberals now?
So I won't answer an hypothetical question of what will happen in the next months. You and I don't know. One thing is clear is unpredictability and chaos there's really good chances that that will continue. That was the entire point of the Prime Minister's speech in Davos, which was saying to middle powers, let's work together to counter political hegemony, hyperscalers, so basically the tech giants, and at the same time American protectionism. So our goal is not only to look and be wait and see mode. In 2025 we're a lot in reaction mode. In 2026 we have a plan and we're putting it into place. And our goal is to make sure that we're investing this important amount of money in our defense sector. We are doing it first and foremost because of us. Second, we're doing at a time because geopolitics is much more chaotic, and at the same time, there's a trade war happening. So we have an over-dependency over the U.S. that we need to be able to change, and we're making sure that we're going to be in a position of force, and we will be able also to create all these jobs. So we're using investments in defense, of course, for a strong man and woman, but also as an important economic stimulus to be able to protect the sectors affected by the tariffs and also to create new jobs in advanced manufacturing and also in sectors that are very much linked to a lot of research and development. So this is win-win, actually, for Canadians.
I'll end sort of where I started, in that everything you just described, again, I think is very welcome news for Canadians, and they would like to believe that it will come to fruition. Will your government be transparent along the way about where you are and where you are in nearing those objectives? Because so far there's been no disclosure about the specific targets over the next 10 years, just what you want at the end of the decade.
Well, I would counter what you're saying by saying that if anyone reads the Defense Industrial Strategy paper, all the objectives are there. And I've mentioned then 125,000 jobs, 50% of increase in export, an increase of 2020. But that's over 10 years, of course. And we now have a new Defense Investment Agency, which has somebody in charge of it, which is Doug Guzman and his team, making sure that finally we go ahead faster with procurement, and finally we can give predictability to Canadian companies, and Canadian forces will be able to get their equipment faster. And we have a Secretary of State for Defense Procurement that his job is actually make sure to make that happen. And so we have this entire plan. Things are moving ahead, and for the rest, it will be a pleasure to answer all your questions to provide more transparency.
We'll do lots of interviews over the next decade, I guess. Thanks, Minister. Appreciate your time as always.
Thank you. Thank you. Pleasure.